Hello, good evening, good day, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the Ask Abhijit show. Today, we discuss, as you know, current affairs, geopolitics, history, and all that wonderful stuff. So, before we begin, let's see who all is present with us in attendance. I can see Rajiv, Akshay, Sampriti, Sri Harsha, Ankita, Crazy Brain Blades, Navneet, Alpha, Raxter, Ananya, Pushkar, Animish, Sauraj, Giga Chad, Kuldeep, Enon Dutt, Durga, Abhay, Vikramaditya, Ajit, Khusro, Ripon, Vilo, Siba, Nitin, Shubham, Sagar, Priyanshi, Azmenor, RTK, Leo, Heartbreaking, Priyanshu, Rohan, Raviraj, Pankaj, Saurabh, Decoding Elections, Bimla, Mosam, Raxter, Chiching, Ajit, Roxy, Abhi, Haripriya, Trupti, Blades, Himanshu, Bonfire, Raviraj, Om, Manish, Mehul, Arnab, Abhay, and lots of other people. Good evening, good day to all of you, wherever you are. I hope you're all doing very well. And some more Sangeet, Chaitanya, Siddharth, Grey White, Ajay Kumar, Bunty, Vijay, Shivam, Mahesh Patil, Yug, Rahul, Saturn, Avanish, Devi, Intellectual Indian, Suraj, Mehul, Sai Kiran, Linneshwar, and Sharifa, Harshit, Kevin, Divya, Harsh, Satwik, Ajiri, Ruby Snow, and lots of other people. Good evening, good day, all of you. Great to have you all on this show this evening when there's an India Pakistan cricket match going on. So I can understand if there are a little fewer people than usual. But hey, I'm here. So, before we begin, this episode is sponsored by Abhijit Chavda Academy, my new course that I've launched. It's a course on Indian history. In case you are not aware of it, it's the link is in the description below. It's a course that is still a work in progress. I'm going to cover the entirety of Indian history, more or less in that, especially ancient Indian history. So that's a course that I've launched. It's available now. The link is in the description. I look forward to seeing you all in there if you are interested. Otherwise, you can always watch my channel, which has way more material than the course, but the course is structured in a certain way and it's chronological, so maybe that's something, in case you're interested in, you can acquire. So that's the thing. Now let's get into the questions. What questions do we have today? And let's go into question number one. Question number one is by Sahil Joshi. I have noticed multiple times that the Ministry of External Affairs of India gives kind of polite and sometimes assertive statements against any nation that tries to act against India or Indian interests in some or the other way. Gives me the feeling that some countries are taking India for granted. At the same time, other countries give aggressive statements even to the slightest issue. Do you think India has a very soft and less aggressive, less assertive approach? Do you think India should be a little more assertive in countering such statements from other nations? All right. I would tend to agree with you overall that the Ministry of External Affairs of India is very it gives very soft statements, very gentle, non controversial, non aggressive, non assertive statements, very conciliatory, kind of meek. That's sort of that's the pattern that you observe overall when it comes to the Ministry of External Affairs of India. uh, for instance, in the US, in China, you have these daily press briefings of their ministries of external affairs. In the case of India, it's like once a week. Yeah. So it gives you the feeling that India is not a major player on the geopolitical scene. You only have once a week press conferences and very bland diplomatic, non-assertive statements and so on. That's what you see. Now, I have said this in the past. Let me say this again. Diplomacy is war by other means, right? And the strength of your diplomatic statements is a direct reflection of your overall geopolitical strength, your comprehensive national power. So if you have a nation that is a small nation with a small economy and a small military, it cannot afford to be assertive diplomatically. The strength of your diplomacy is directly proportional to your overall strength. The larger the stick, the hard power you hold, the more assertive your diplomacy can be. American diplomats are very brash. They are sometimes very undiplomatic. It's because the US is a global geopolitical hegemon. It's the only superpower. The Chinese are now aspiring to be a superpower. Since 2012, they have changed their approach. They are now indulging in what is called wolf warrior diplomacy, very aggressive, very assertive diplomacy, very brash statements, very harsh statements, right? And India is not there yet. India is still a three something trillion dollar economy. We are not even a $5 trillion economy. As your economy grows, your military strength grows. Once you reach a certain stage, you can afford to speak in a different way, diplomatically. So this style of your diplomacy is a direct reflection of your overall standing in the geopolitical chessboard, right? So yes, I agree that the diplomacy that India does is kind of a little bit submissive, kind of meek. That's what the Chinese did for the longest time. They swallowed all the insults that the Western nations heaped upon them. Chinese diplomats before 2012 were always conciliatory, meek, humble, non-confrontational, non-assertive, non-aggressive. They had this policy for the longest time. They swallowed all the insults. It's only after 2012 that they changed their approach. Deng Xiaoping said, "Hide your strengths and bide your time." Right? He said that in the late 20th century, and that's what the Chinese followed for the longest time. India also needs to follow this approach. There's no point making very strong diplomatic statements if you cannot back them up with actual facts on the ground, with actual military strength. Right? Now, let me also point something out. I mean, recently there has been some interesting diplomacy from India, which is something that I've not seen before. Let me put that on the screen. So recently, the Chinese ambassador in Sri Lanka made some ridiculous statements about India. That India has been aggressive against Sri Lanka like 17. India has visited aggression on Sri Lanka 17 times, that sort of thing, without naming India, but he referred to the northern neighbor, which is only India, right? So he made some very injudicious and false statements about India, and this was the response. This came in yesterday from the Indian diplomatic mission in Sri Lanka. It says, "We have noted the remarks of the Chinese ambassador. His violation of basic diplomatic etiquette may be a personal trait or reflecting of a larger national attitude." How sarcastic and scathing that is. His view of Sri Lanka's northern neighbor may be colored by how his own country behaves. India, we assure him, is very different. His imputing a geopolitical context to the visit of a purported scientific research vessel is a giveaway. Opaqueness and debt-driven agendas are now a major challenge, especially for smaller nations. Recent developments are a caution. Sri Lanka needs support, not unwanted pressure or unnecessary controversies to serve another country's agenda. This is, I believe, the harshest diplomatic statement I've ever seen India issue. In my entire, I mean, my living memory, I have never seen India issue such a strong and harsh and scathing diplomatic statement. I mean, it is still a classy statement. It's not vulgar and impolite, but it's scathing, right? And it makes things very clear that the Chinese are lying, and the Chinese have put Sri Lanka into the debt trap, which they do to other nations. And yeah, and the entire matter of the Chinese spy ship that came to Sri Lanka, that docked there, it obviously has a geopolitical context and all that. So this is, I believe, a break from India's tradition. I've never seen such a strong and harsh diplomatic statement from India. Now, some very intelligent people are telling me on Twitter that India should have sunk the Chinese vessel very quietly. Those people they have a lot of growing up to do, I would say. Yeah, sinking a major research vessel, a spy ship, quietly. I mean, what are you people smoking? So yeah. So anyway, that's a different matter. So my point is this: we are seeing slightly more assertive diplomacy from India. It's something that can only be a reflection of India's overall geopolitical strength and standing. Diplomacy is a direct reflection of your hard power, right? And India still isn't a major power in Asia. India is the only nation that can stand up to China, and we are showing it from time to time. But India has a long way to go before India can change its diplomatic approach. Right? India needs to become, I would say, a $10 trillion economy before India can change its diplomatic approach. $5 trillion is the first milestone we have to reach, and then $10 trillion. When you reach that status, $10 trillion, then the Chinese will realize that there is nothing they can do about India. It is what it is. If you are a $3 trillion economy and they're a $15 trillion economy nearly, then they can believe that they can ride roughshod over you, right? So India, the only thing India needs to do is we have to put our head down and work as hard as possible for the next 10-20 years. Only then will you see a change in India's diplomatic approach, right? So yeah, so that's what I have to say about this. Samartha Gandhi says Dr. S. Jaishankar recently visited Argentina, and his visit has improved the relations to a great extent. Any impact on India UK free trade pact and India UK ties, considering India's position on this issue? Right. So it's interesting that the Indian visit, the Indian External Affairs Minister's visit to Argentina is being linked to India UK relations. Now, why is it so? Why is Samarth speaking about that? So let's explain why it is so. Right? There's always more than meets the eye when it comes to geopolitics, especially Argentina. So let's go to the map and understand why this is something that has to do with Argentina and the UK. So Argentina is this nation here, right? The big nation at this at the southern extremity of the South American continent. So this all has to do with the Falkland Islands, which the Argentines called Las Islas Malvinas, the Malvinas Islands. The British call them the Falkland Islands. Now, these islands are obviously off the coast of Argentina, so one would expect that they would belong to Argentina. But no, they belong to this nation up here, the United Kingdom. And the Argentines have always claimed this archipelago. So in the 1980s, early 1980s, Argentina tried to acquire this piece of maritime real estate by force. Margaret Thatcher, the then Prime Minister of the UK, sent an expeditionary force, a naval force, to fight the Argentines. There was a brief Falklands War, and the British won. Right? And obviously, the British were supported by various other larger geopolitical powers and so on, as you know. So the British control this archipelago. And this is a disputed territory. The Argentine government and the Argentine nation has always repeatedly said that it belongs to them. Now, this is something that will be resolved in due course of time. So this is a dispute, a territorial dispute between the UK, Argentina. India now has excellent relations with the Argentines. It's a work in progress, obviously. But Dr. Jaishankar visited Argentina very recently, and things are looking good when it comes to India-Argentina relations, right? And the interesting matter is this. Let me put something else on the screen. So there was a joint statement between India and Argentina. Let me show you the joint statement. Let's put that on the screen. India reiterated its support to the resumption of negotiations to find a solution to the sovereignty issue relating to the question of the Malvinas Islands, in accordance with the resolutions of the United Nations General Assembly and the Special Committee on Decolonization. So this should be a non-controversial statement, etc. The only thing that raises a little bit of eyebrows is the nomenclature. So India has chosen to call these islands the Malvinas Islands, not the Falklands Islands. So it is an implicit recognition of the validity of Argentina's claim on the islands by using the name that the Argentines use for the islands instead of using the name the British use for the islands. It's like there is a different dispute between China and Japan about the Senkaku Islands, which the Chinese call the Diaoyu Islands. So if India were to refer to the islands as the Senkaku Islands, then it means that India is implicitly supporting the Japanese claim. But if India were to call the islands the Diaoyu Islands, it would mean that India is implicitly supporting the Chinese claim on the islands. That's just a hypothetical scenario I'm offering you to understand how these things work. So India, in this joint statement, referred to the islands as the Malvinas Islands, which is implicitly supporting the Argentine claims. You could construe it in that manner, that India is indirectly and implicitly giving a little bit of support to Argentina's claims on a claim on the island archipelago, right? And why not? The British have always had a history of supporting all kinds of anti-India activities. There's a lot of anti-India activities that go on British territory, on British soil. Lots of Pakistani supporters are on British territory. Other kinds of supporters also, separatists who want to see India fragmented. All of that is being supported and fomented on British territory. The British have always supported Pakistan in their terroristic activities and other activities against India. They created Pakistan. They broke India into pieces. So why should India not pay them back a little bit, right? Right now, India is still a smallish nation when it comes to overall geopolitical power. Yeah. But yes, India is a growing nation, and this is going to germinate into a bigger tree in the future, and they deserve it. Right? So yeah, There is an implicit support to the Argentinian claim on the Malvinas Islands and not the British claim on that island archipelago. Now, will this impact India, UK, whatever ties, etc.? Who cares? The UK is more or less a non-entity now. The only relevance the UK, it's still one of the major economies. Yeah, India has recently surpassed the UK overall GDP recently. So the UK is still a major financial hub. The only relevance the UK has globally, let me assure you, the only relevance the United Kingdom has globally is as the global center of money laundering. London is the epicenter of global money laundering. All these various shell companies that you can create in the UK, if you have sufficient money, you can do anything you want. Yeah. And all the fugitives of the world like to have a house in London or somewhere in the UK. So the only real relevance that the erstwhile British Empire has is as a puppet of the US and the global money laundering hub. All the various dodgy arms dealers of the Middle East, all the various Saudi sheikhs and princes, all the various dictators and despots of the world in various puppet dictators in Africa, in other places, they all have investments in the UK. They all have bungalows or flats, penthouse flats in London. So that's the only relevance the UK has. Now, whether it affects the India UK trade pact and all that doesn't really matter. India is going to anyway surpass all these irrelevant nations. And it is in their interests to have good relations with India because it will help them financially. India is a growing power. India is a growing economy. No one's going to stop India from achieving what it wants to achieve. In the next 20 years, India will most likely surpass the $10 trillion mark unless there is something that is like a global catastrophe, which I don't see hopefully happening. So it is in the UK's interest to get in line and have good relations with India. If they don't want it, they can go to hell and take a hike. That's all that matters. Yeah. So yeah, that's what I can say about this matter. Ananda Biswas says recently, so-called Putin's brain, Aleksandr Dugin, there was an assassination attempt on him. Unfortunately, his daughter fell prey to that. What's your take on this incident, and who do you think must be behind this attack? Ukraine, US, etc. In the future, can such incidents escalate to major steps taken by Russia? Right. So, who is Aleksandr Dugin? He is a historian, philosopher, writer, that sort of person. He's a scholar. He's an intellectual. He has authored books on various topics, including on geopolitics. One of the only books on geopolitics that makes sense, in my opinion. Yeah. Yeah, so he is an intellectual. He's not a politician. He's not a powerful person. You may have a great following. It doesn't mean you are powerful. Yeah. So he is an influential person. He's a very significant scholar, writer, historian, geopolitical analyst, and so on. But he's not a powerful politician or any such thing. Some people allege that he is the brain behind Putin. Not so. I don't agree with that. Putin is his own man. He doesn't need the blessings or the inputs from somebody to do what he's doing, right? So I disagree that Aleksandr Dugin is Putin's brain and the brain behind Russia's geopolitical, geostrategic initiatives and all that. Right now, the thing is this: yes, there was an assassination attempt on him. He was supposed to get into a car. There was a bomb in that car. Unfortunately, what happened is that he at the last minute went to another car and his daughter went into the car that had a bomb, and the car blew up and his daughter unfortunately died. His daughter was a reasonably young person, late 20s, early 30s, Daria Dugina. Yeah. I think she was a journalist or something. So yes, the bomb was intended for Aleksandr Dugin. It ended up killing his daughter. You see, geopolitics is not child's play. It's deadly serious. People, this is what happens. Yeah, it is not child's play. It is a very grown up matter. It's a matter of life and death. People die, and this is what happened, right? So this is clearly an act of terrorism. When somebody, whoever did this, well, they targeted unarmed civilians, non-combatants, right? When you are targeting people who are not fighters, people who are not soldiers, people who are not part of the military, when you're targeting civilians, that is terrorism. So whoever has done this has indulged in a blatant act of terrorism. Now, the Western media will justify it. They will say that he was evil and his daughter was part of the regime and blah, blah, blah. So it's perfectly justifiable to kill them. The Western media is known to portray outright terrorists as austere religious scholars, and so on and so forth. They will justify anything, any kind of bloodshed, any kind of barbarism, to in service of the empire. That's what they will do. That's what the Western media is known to do. They will whitewash the worst of crimes, as long as those crimes are in the service of their cause. So the truth is, what happened is an act of terrorism. Yeah. So what's my take on this incident? Who is behind this? Well, I don't have any actual information. One can surmise that maybe it's the Ukrainians who are behind this. Now we know who is the puppeteer of Ukraine. It's the US, right? But the Americans will never get their own hands dirty in this. They will never get involved in such acts of terrorism directly. They will, if they do it, we know that they have done this, done things like this in the past. Yeah. Look at the history of the past is 50, 60 years. The Americans have been all behind all kinds of regime change operations and coup d'etats, and various dictators. Uh, See that track record in South America. It's terrible. So it would not be surprising if overall maybe there is some US hand in that, but they will definitely not be involved directly in this. They will be involved via proxy, if at all. The proxy is obviously, I would expect, somebody in Ukraine, or maybe the Ukrainian government, or some portion of the US Ukrainian military, or something like that. Right? So the blame, or the suspicion will obviously go towards Ukraine. Now, can such incidents in the future escalate to something major? The the intention would be that, see, when you target somebody who is a civilian, but who is who is very well respected and maybe admired and maybe loved in his nation, and when it ends up killing his daughter, well, the intention is to put the leadership of Russia in a very tight position, that they have to respond to this, right? So the intention, whether it was Aleksandr Dugin who was killed, or whether his daughter was killed, the intention was to provoke Vladimir Putin and put him in a difficult position, that he has to respond in order to placate the people who feel that these people killed our scholar and you did nothing about it. And therefore, by doing that, by putting Mr. Putin in such a difficult position, you may induce him to make some kind of mistake and some miscalculation. So the Ukraine war is proceeding in a slow war format, right? Old-fashioned 20th century warfare. No, it's not blitzkrieg warfare. It's a very slow and steady war that's going on, right? So maybe that's not what the West wants. That's not what the Ukrainians and the Americans want. Maybe they want Mr. Putin to make some harsh and silly and stupid decision that will end up costing him costing him. So overall, I would expect that the intention behind this terrorist act was to put pressure on Mr. Putin and induce him into making some kind of mistake that he would otherwise not have made. And thus far, we are seeing that it's been a few days since this incident happened. There has been no actual response from the Russians, right? So sometimes, if you want to win a war, you have to sometimes swallow some provocations and not respond to provocations designed to induce you into making a mistake. So we have seen no response essentially from the Russians. Maybe they will eventually respond at a time and place of their choosing, right? But there has been no knee-jerk response from the Russian government, from Vladimir Putin, from any such quarters. So if the intention was to provoke the Russian government into making some miscalculation or some mistake, that has not worked, right? So there we are. Piyush says, what are your views on India purchasing US drones worth $3 billion? Is it a bit expensive? If so, what should have been done of those $3 billion instead of purchasing drones? We do need drones. So these drones that are being referred to here are those Reaper drones, I believe, MQ-9 Reaper or something. I think that's what it's called. Now, these drones are high altitude, high endurance drones, and these are hunter-killer drones. So they are not only used for surveillance, they carry a significant, not very massive payload, but a significant payload. They can carry bombs, missiles, various things. They can be used for surveillance in the maritime domain over sea. Yeah, they can be used to take out various targets at sea. They can be used in mountainous terrain. They can be used high above the India let's say India China border, look deep into Chinese occupied territory, and maybe if required, take some action, that sort of thing. The Americans have in the past used these drones for anti terrorism operations in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Yeah. And the British operate some of these drones. I think even the French may have some of them, and so on and so forth. So this is a very well proven system. It's obviously very expensive. Yes, I 30 drones for $3 billion, $100 million per piece. That's a tad expensive, one would say. But India does need these drones. I would say that maybe this purchase is a stopgap purchase. We need a few drones right now. Let's acquire these drones, use them for now, use them for the next 10 years or so. In the meanwhile, develop our own drone technology. I don't think it's very difficult to develop our own indigenous drone technology. We already have some Rustam or some drone, medium altitude uh, kind of drone. Yeah. So we are doing that. We have acquired Israeli Heron drones. I think India needs to invest significant amounts of resources into developing our own versions of these high altitude, medium altitude, and long endurance drones. Right? What's a long endurance drone? Typically, a drone that can loiter and stay in the air for 10 hours plus, more than 10 hours, with a significantly good payload. And there are two varieties: medium altitude and high altitude. So medium altitude would be less than 10 kilometers, I would say, maybe 5 or so kilometers up in the air. And high altitude is 10 plus 10 to 15 kilometers up in the air, that sort of thing. So the MQ-9 Reaper drone is a high altitude, long endurance drone. So I would imagine that India does need these drones. They're expensive, yes. Or anything you purchase from the Americans is going to be expensive. It's going to cost you money. Yeah. So I think it's a stopgap arrangement. The Turks have developed their own drones. I forget the name. It's a Turkish name. Good drones, yeah. Even the Iranians are developing drones. The Chinese have their own drones. So India should get into this thing, and India should also develop its own drone technology for a family of various kinds of drones: medium altitude, high altitude, and long endurance, that sort of thing. Hunter killer drones, surveillance drones, whatever. We need to do that. Get your act together. HAL, DRDO, whoever is involved in this, needs to happen. So yes, it is something that most likely India needs right now. Until we have our own indigenously designed and developed drones, we would need to acquire a few drones as a stopgap measure, as a temporary measure, and to keep Uncle Sam happy that we are buying your weapons. So there's also a geopolitical and diplomatic, most likely, angle to this, to tell the Americans that we are not buying everything from the Russians. We are also buying your weapons, and we are spending some money on that. So it serves multiple purposes. So yeah, I think it's a necessary evil. Get some drones from the Americans. They are good drones. I'm sure they are well proven. They do work. They are effective. So get these drones. I don't think it's finalized yet, but it's in the final stages of approval or whatever it's called, this entire deal. So maybe by the end of this year, the next 4 or 5 months, we will it will be the signatures will be done, and soon enough, India would be able to acquire those 30 pieces of aerial hardware. The long-term game is to develop our own drone technology and become self-sufficient in all these military hardware and software matters. Yeah. Udit says, is the Western media's obsession about Finnish Prime Minister Sanna Marin's party video a distraction from what's happening in Ukraine and Taiwan? Oh yes, this poor lady. So what happened there? So the Finnish Prime Minister, her name is Sanna Marin. She's a reasonably young person. I think she's in her mid 30s, 35, 36 years old. And recently, this all came out in the social media that she was filmed partying with various other people, and it looks bad. So let's take a look at the images. Sanna Marin party. Let's put that on the screen. I feel sorry for her. I mean, is there any rule that if you're a prime minister, you cannot have a party once in a while? So yeah, this is what's emerged. I don't think there's anything wrong in having a party once in a while with your friends or whatever. Yeah, it makes you look a little bit immature and non-leader like. I mean, the Americans in the 2020 elections, one of the main things the Democrats, one of the main criticisms the Democrats had about President Trump was that he was unpresidential. He was not leader-like. He did not have the gravitas that a president should have. He was a little bit funny, and he did not behave like a president. So the same allegation can be made uh, about this lady, that the video that was leaked out, it makes her appear unprime ministerial. It makes her look like a regular person, not somebody who's a prime minister and the leader of a nation. So um, so that's what it is. So uh, how do we judge the performance of a leader? Is it important if they have a party once in a while in their personal life after hours? Is there anything wrong with that? I don't understand why there is something wrong with that. I'm sure she works every single day. I'm sure she has not missed a single day of work ever since she became prime minister. And everybody has their own way of winding down. Maybe she likes to party with some friends. I don't see anything wrong with that. Yeah, it makes her look silly. So this is clearly a political ploy by somebody who videotaped this and then leaked this the film to the media and social media and all that. Yeah, it's clearly what's called a hatchet job. Somebody has stabbed her in the back. It's a political ploy, obviously. So uh, so is she to blame for what happened? I think she should have been a little more discreet. It's okay to party, but don't make sure that it doesn't get leaked out, right? Everybody needs to wind down, no matter how hard you work, no matter how serious you are as a leader of your nation. Once in a while, you need to indulge in some sort of behavior that distracts you for some time from the pressures of your work. Some people like to sleep, some people like to read, some people like to meditate, some people like to party. This lady likes to party. I see nothing wrong with that. So clearly somebody has done a hatchet job on her. I feel sorry for her. I don't know what her politics is, or whether she's good or bad as a leader. I have absolutely no idea. Finland is not a very significant nation as far as I'm concerned. So I have not ever really followed Finnish politics. I know their overall position in the geopolitical chessboard. Finland has always been the frontier nation against the Russians. They had a war with the Russians in the 1930s, 1940s, somewhere around there. Yeah. And right now they're trying to apply to become a member of NATO, and they have always been wary of the Russians. They have a very strong civilian recruitment program in which civilians have dual roles, like they serve in the military. Everybody has, those who are part of that have weapons, and they are available at very short notice to join the armed forces and all that. So that's the situation about Finland. I kind of feel sorry for her, this lady, but she should have, in my opinion, she should have been a little more careful about who she allows to film her. So yeah, that's what happens. I'm sure it's a lesson she'll never forget. Will it affect her standing as prime minister? Maybe, maybe not. Yeah, that's how it goes. So yeah, is it a distraction from what's happening in Ukraine and Taiwan? Maybe that's also one of the purposes for having this controversy erupt. People like controversies. People like it when some leader is caught doing something that is not very leader-like. You know, it's it's uh, it's great material for the gossip mills, and the media loves it. The media loves this sort of thing. So yeah, it's a good distraction if that was the purpose, to distract the people from what's happening in Ukraine and Taiwan. Taiwan, obviously, the Chinese are tightening the screws. They're tightening the screws on Taiwan. They are now no longer recognizing the Taiwanese airspace and their maritime waters and all that. They are sending drones over Taiwan, over the island of Taiwan. The Chinese, and so on. So Taiwan's sovereignty is under a big cloud, a big dark cloud. The Chinese are slowly tightening the screws. They are putting the Taiwanese people under the siege kind of mentality illusion, right? Um, that's what's happening. That's not very good for Taiwan. And Taiwan is obviously, well, it's one of the what you would call the U.S. vassal states. When it comes to Ukraine, things are not going well in Ukraine. The Western media and all the various disposable minions on social media, they will portray the Ukraine war as a lost cause for Russia. But hey, look at the maps. Look at the situation on the ground. Inch by inch, meter by meter, the Russians are advancing. They're consolidating their positions, and they're going to get what they want. And there's nothing the Americans can do about it in the long run. Ukraine, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, may have had its borders redrawn permanently. So things are not going well in Ukraine. Things are not going very well in Taiwan. Still, Taiwan is still secure for now. Of course, that's coming into a cloud. So things are not going very well for American interests in Ukraine, in Taiwan. So yeah, maybe people do need a distraction from time to time. There could be more distractions coming in the future. Who knows? New things coming up in the air, masks again. Who knows? Who knows? They'll come up with anything. So yeah, that's where we are right now. Tomislav Nagy says, I am a European. I have never in my whole life treated any human being badly because of ethnicity, race, or language. To say that every European is racist is not acceptable. I agree. It's not acceptable to say that every European is racist. Are you saying that I have said that? I don't think I have ever said that every European is racist. If it sounded like I may have meant it that way, then I will readily apologize. I do not believe that every European is racist. There are lots of good people in Europe. I know that for a fact. Not every European is racist. But let's look at it from a different perspective. Every single European nation or kingdom or empire that has participated in colonization has used racism to justify its policies and its actions. That is indeed a truth. Indeed, the truth. It's always boiled down to civilizing the backward natives. They are savages. They need to be civilized. So that's always been the pretext to justify the actual actions that they have perpetrated, which is genocide and colonization and plunder and loot and destruction of entire nations and civilizations and cultures. So that has indeed been the truth. Now, let's say Belgium did horrific atrocities in Africa, and it was all racism. They used racist arguments to justify what they did. It doesn't mean that every single person who lived in Belgium at the time was racist. There would have been lots of good people in Belgium who had not an ounce of racism in them. Yes? So it is completely unacceptable to say that every European is racist. Completely unacceptable. I completely agree with you. But overall, the history of Europe, especially in the past 500 years, the age of colonialism has been an age of unbridled racism. So you may not be a racist. I'm not sure what nation you're from. Nagy means Hungary, I'm sure. Hungary. I don't think Hungary has, as far as I can recall, indulged in colonial activities. And the people of Hungary are very nice people, as far as I know, in whatever little experience I've had. So I totally agree with you. To say that every European is racist is completely unacceptable. That itself is racism. To say that all Europeans are racist. So yeah, the world is complicated. It's complex. History, I mean, if you look at the overall history of Europe, overall, it's not a very good history in the past 500 years. Even if you look at the history of the past 1,000 plus years, I mean, the destruction of European culture, the original native Indo-European culture, is a tale of horrific atrocities and sorrows, the Northern Crusades and all. So Europe has a very, very dark history, unfortunately. If you look at it, the past 1,000 or 1,500 years. And even if you look at the various other things that happened in Europe, the expansion of the Anglo-Saxons into the UK, what's now the UK, the British Islands, that itself was bloody, brutal. There was a lot of racism there. The Irish were looked upon as second-class citizens. The Celtic peoples, they endured an enormous amount of racism from the Anglo-Saxons. I'm sure people don't know this at all. The Irish were treated like second-class subhuman citizens by the English speakers, the Irish, and all the other Celtic peoples of the British Islands, whether it is the Welsh, whether it is the Scots, or the Irish. Yeah. So there's been a lot of this. The Roman history itself is nothing to, I mean, it's portrayed as glorious by European historians, but hey, they create a wasteland and they call it peace. That's what the Romans used to do. It's not my quote. Look it up. So overall, the history of the human species is a history of warfare. It's a history of violence. We are inherently violent. Yeah. But I totally agree with you, Tomislav Nagy, that to say that every European is racist is absolutely unacceptable. There are lots of good people in Europe, even today, even in the past, even during the time when Europe was destroying the rest of the civilized world. Even then, you would have had good people in Europe. But overall, yeah, we know what the history is. Okay, Lakshya says, in your experience, are there any countries in Europe that are culturally similar to Bharat, India? And is it ever possible for Indians to be friends with Europeans in spite of racism and Hinduphobia? Look, it is of course possible for Indians to be friends with Europeans. There are lots of good people in every nation in the world, in every culture in the world. No matter which part of the geography of the planet you go to, you will find lots of good people there. Right? So, yeah, there is racism in Europe, but not all Europeans are racist. There is Hinduphobia in the entire Western world that originates in certain things, but not everyone is a Hindu phobe, right? It is certainly possible for Indians to be friends with Europeans. Not all Europeans, but many Europeans, I'm sure. Now, is there any nation in Europe that is culturally similar to Bharat? In the past, the whole of Europe had its own native culture and civilization, the old Indo-European culture. So the old European Indo-European culture was the same as the old Indian culture, which to some extent still exists in India, right? Hinduism, Indo-European culture was nothing but that in its all different kinds of local manifestations. The Roman gods are the same as the Indian gods. The Greek gods are the ancestors of the Roman gods. The Romans adopted the Greek gods. The Greek gods are the same as the Indian gods. The Persian gods are the same as the Indian gods. The Indian gods are the oldest of the gods, right? The same pantheon, you will see it in the Nordic pantheon. Thor is Indra. Thor is the thunder god and the hammer god. That's what Indra is. Thor defeats this great sea serpent Jormungandr. What did Indra do? He defeated the great serpent Vritra, who swallowed the oceans of the world, and so on and so forth. So the same culture existed all across Europe. It was destroyed by the Abrahamic culture. It was destroyed, uprooted through horrific barbaric means. This is the truth. Look at the history of Europe, study it. Today's historians won't highlight those matters, but pick up history textbooks. Pick up any good history textbook that deals with the history of Europe in the past 2000 years. They will focus on that briefly, but it's there. We know what happened. The entire indigenous culture of Europe was destroyed. So, below the surface in Europe, we still have elements of the old culture. Let me give you a couple of examples. Yeah. So, the religion is now the Abrahamic religion, as we know, yes, but there is still elements of European culture, old European culture that's still left behind. Here's an example from Lithuania. Do we know where Lithuania is? Look it up on the map. I will show you an example of Lithuanian culture. So traditional Lithuanian houses are adorned with the motif of two horse heads, the Ashwins, the Baltic counterparts of the Rig Vedic Ashwins, the divine horse twins. Old Lithuanian Ashwa and Sanskrit Ashwa mean the same thing, horse. Take a look at this traditional Lithuanian house if it will ever load. Here it is. As you can see, there's this motif of twin horses on top of it. Here is a better image of that. So this is one example of old European culture which is very similar to Indian culture, which essentially originates in Indian culture. Here's something else. Let's take a look at the linguistics. Words in English, Sanskrit, and Lithuanian. You is tvam in Sanskrit, which is tu in Lithuanian. Who is kach in Sanskrit, which is kach in Lithuanian. When in English is kada in Sanskrit. How do I say in Sanskrit, when will I be happy? You say, kada sukhi bhavamyaham. Kada. So, kada is kada in Lithuanian. Sheep, aves, aves. Horse, ashwa, ashwa. Go, iti, iti. God, devas, dievas. Agni is ugnis. Danta is dantis. Swa, shwa. Shwana, shwana. Dhumas is smoke. Dhumas in Lithuanian. Myrtis is myrtis. Pada is soul, is padas, viras, viras, and so on and so forth. So if you look at the Lithuanian language, it sounds just like Sanskrit. The pronunciations will be different today. Nobody in Lithuania will remember the origin of their language, but here we are. You see it right in front of you. So there is so much even today that the European culture has in common with India, especially when you go slightly below the surface, and at the surface you will see the Abrahamic culture, and that is still very strong in various parts of Europe. But if you go a few layers beneath the surface, you will see the true Indo-European culture, which still exists at subsurface levels and all that. Yeah, so there's plenty in common between India and Europe to a certain extent. Okay, Pramod Singh says, please light your thoughts on the missing nuclear device on the Nanda Devi Parvat. Does it still exist? Interesting, interesting. Where is this Nanda Devi Parvat? Let's take a look at the map. Let's put the map on the screen. Let's find this mountain, Nanda Devi. So I think Nanda Devi is the second tallest mountain peak in India. The tallest one is Kanchenjunga, and Nanda Devi is somewhere in northern India, in the Himalayan region, in the near Rishikesh. Okay, let's just search for it. It's somewhere in this region. Nanda Devi. And here we go. Here it is. So this is the mountain peak, Nanda Devi. You can see it on the satellite image, which will not make a lot of sense over here, but there it is. This is the mountain peak, the second highest mountain peak in India, right? So what happened here? So as you can see, it is very close to Chinese occupied Tibet. Yes. So what's the story behind this missing nuclear device? So what happened is this. Okay, so this is something that happened in 1965. So let us put this into, okay, let me just keep that on the screen, the map, so that you understand what's happening. So what happened in 1965? To put things in context, the magnificent Prime Minister of India, the greatest Prime Minister ever, Mr. Nehru, very sadly and regrettably died in 1964. Mr. Nehru died in May 1964, and Mr. Shastri became Prime Minister of India. Mr. Shastri, as we know, died in January 1966. So this entire matter happened in 1965 when Mr. Shastri was the Prime Minister of India. So the Chinese had tested a nuclear weapon for the first time in 1964 in Chinese occupied territory, Xinjiang, so-called Xinjiang, etc. So what the Americans were obviously concerned about this. So they wanted to spy on Chinese military activities, nuclear activities in Chinese occupied Tibet, Xinjiang, that region. And so they entered into some kind of agreement with the government of India that they would place an observing, a monitoring station, some monitoring devices, etc., on top of the Nanda Devi mountain, at the summit of the mountain in India. And the Nanda Devi mountain is nearly 8 kilometers, almost 8 kilometers tall, slightly less than 8 kilometers. So from there, you could see deep into Chinese occupied territory, maybe 50 kilometers away, where this entire thing was happening, right? So what happened is that in 1965, a team of Indian and American mountaineers climbed up the Nanda Devi mountain. What were they carrying? They were carrying surveillance equipment. So there was an antenna or two antennas, and there were nuclear powered devices, plutonium powered radioisotope thermoelectric generators. Okay, so I think there were 7 plutonium capsules and the thermoelectric generator and some surveillance equipment that would be powered by the radioactive radioisotope thermoelectric generator. So this attempt to scale the mountain was done by a team of 14 American mountaineers, I think, and a bunch of Indian mountaineers too, because the Indians also had to be involved. This is Indian territory. We need to see what they're doing. This was attempted sometime in 1965. The attempt failed. They tried to climb the mountain, and while they were climbing the mountain, they were high up, I believe, someplace, and there was a blizzard, a massive storm, and they had no option but to go back down, otherwise they would have frozen to death. And the storm was so severe they had to leave the equipment on the mountain. So they left the equipment, the radioisotope thermoelectric generators, the plutonium capsules, etc. They left it on a ledge or platform somewhere on the mountain, and they went down, and they were able to make it down alive. They did not lose any lives, right? So this happened in 1965. The next year, in the spring of 1966, after the death of Mr. Shastri, the same American climbers returned to the mountain. They climbed it up again, and they knew where they had kept the equipment. And what they found in the spring of 1966 is that the equipment was missing. So they surmised that there must have been an avalanche, on the mountain, which swept away all the equipment. This happens. In the Himalayas, avalanches are common. On the Nanda Devi mountain, also avalanches are reasonably common. So they surmised that there was an avalanche while they were not there, and all the equipment was swept down somewhere downhill because of this avalanche. Then there was another attempt in 1967, which is said to have been a partial success. I have no idea what that means. And then there was a third attempt again in 1967 on a different mountain. This time it was on the Nanda Kot mountain. So Nanda Devi is here. Where is Nanda Kot? It's here. If you can see, there is a different mountain called Nanda Kot. It is a slightly smaller mountain, not as high as Nanda Devi. So the third attempt which they did on this smaller mountain was a success. They were able to put the equipment there, and it worked, and they were able to monitor whatever the Chinese were doing. Right. So all of this happened in the 1960s. It was all secret. In 1978, the Indian Prime Minister Morarji Desai revealed everything. This is what the Americans did. He was very strongly anti-US, anti-whatever. Yeah. So that's what happened. That's how the story came out into the public domain, because Mr. Morarji Desai revealed what had happened, what had transpired in the 1960s. Now, some people say that because of this, so the question is, first of all, what happened to the missing equipment? The equipment that was placed on a ledge or a platform or some flat surface on the mountain in 1965, when they came back the next year, it had disappeared. So the official story is that there was an avalanche which would have swept it down, and maybe it's lying somewhere frozen in the ice and the snow of the mountain somewhere downhill. And it's such a big mountain, it's very hard to find the equipment. So one interpretation or one scenario is that the equipment was lost in an avalanche. It was swept downhill, and it's still lying somewhere there. The second plausible scenario is that the Indian government later on sent some climbers quietly and retrieved the equipment for research, analysis, or whatever. So that's the two possibilities. Either the Indian government acquired the equipment secretly, or the equipment was actually lost. What if the equipment was lost and it's still lying somewhere there? Is it a problem? Well, let's understand what plutonium is. Plutonium is the element that is in the radioisotope thermoelectric generator that was supposed to power the devices, the surveillance equipment. So plutonium is a radioactive element. Plutonium 238 is what was used in the radioactive isotope. It has a half-life of 88 years, which means in 88 years time, half of the plutonium will have decayed. So it is the heat source in the thermoelectric generators. The actual more common plutonium is plutonium 239, which is the primary fissile isotope in nuclear weapons. It has a half-life of 24,000 years. That is going to last forever, essentially. And then there is plutonium 240 and 241 also. So the plutonium we are talking about, that we are concerned about, is the plutonium 238 that was present in those capsules and in the devices. Now, in case it is still lying around on the mountain, somewhere in the foothills of the mountain, the thing is this region is the catchment area from where the Ganga gets its waters. There are these big mountain peaks here. These are the Himalayas. There are glaciers that over time slowly melt. And then there are these major rivers here, the Alaknanda, the Bhagirathi, that feed the river Ganga. This all happens in not the Rishikesh, but Devaprayag. I think it's in Devaprayag that the Alaknanda and the Bhagirathi meet together. Here it is. So you have one river, which is the Alaknanda. The other one is the Bhagirathi. They get together here, and then they are called the Ganga. So it is in Devaprayag that the Ganga river actually takes shape, and then it comes downwards into Rishikesh, and then down towards mainland India, and so on and so forth. So even the Alaknanda, the Bhagirathi, and other rivers, they all get their waters from the ice melt and all that in this overall region. So if there is plutonium lying around, that could be a very dangerous thing. If the capsules break open for whatever reason, plutonium is extraordinarily toxic, extremely toxic. It first of all, it can kill people through its radiation. Secondly, it can kill people through heavy metal poisoning, and very small amounts of plutonium are enough to kill people. So if the plutonium is still lying around, and if the capsules break open, then they could leach into the groundwater. Yeah, they could contaminate the rivers, the waters that flow into the Alaknanda and the Bhagirathi and other rivers that feed the Ganga. That could be a disaster for India, because millions of people live along the banks of the Ganga. Millions of people get their water from the Ganga, and so on. It flows all the way down into Bangladesh as the Padma River. Yeah, so that could be a massive, massive disaster. So, in case the plutonium is still there, I think something needs to be done about it. I believe the Indian government every year periodically tests the waters or the snow or whatever in this region for radiation. That's what I hear. I'm not sure. So we don't know if the plutonium is still lying around there, or maybe the Indian government may have retrieved it at some point in time. These things probably will never be revealed to the public for the next few decades. But yeah, that is the story. That is as far as I know. So that's what happened in 1965, 1966, 1967. The Americans wanted to keep an eye on the Chinese, and India was also definitely agreeable to that. And so this entire episode happened. All right, so that's the story about the missing nuclear device on the Nanda Devi mountain in northern India. Milan says, was Nepal ever a part of Bharat, or has it always been an independent kingdom since ancient times? For those who don't know where Nepal is, let's take a look at Nepal. Uh, so Nepal is over here, right? North India. In the Himalayas, essentially the Himalayan region, northern India, that is now the independent sovereign nation of Nepal. So what is the story? Well, the Nepalese say that they have always been independent since the beginning. That's what they say. Okay, so what do the facts of history tell us, right? So if you can see, Nepal is part of Jambu Dweep. It's part of the Indian subcontinent. It's very clear, right? It's over here. Now, what's the story? So Nepal, at various points in time, has been part of the Kosala Mahajanapada, the Panchal Mahajanapada, the Malla Mahajanapada, the Kashi Mahajanapada, and the Vrijika Mahajanapada, which was a confederation of various clans led by the Licchavi clan. So these are various Mahajanapadas that Nepal was at various points of time part of. Kosal was one of the most powerful and prosperous Mahajanapadas of all time, right? We know that. Yeah, I hope you know that. Panchal, Malla, etc. were also there. So Nepal was the territory of Nepal, the present day territory of Nepal, was part of these various Mahajanapadas at various points in time. The Mahajanapada era begins right after the Vedic era. It most likely lasted thousands of years. And the Mahajanapada era lasted until about 500 or so BC. And then you had the various Magadha empires that came into place after that. So then you had various empires that were based out of Magad. The capital of Magad was typically Rajgir, Rajagriha, or Patliputra, which is now called Patna, right? So Nepal, the territory of Nepal, was at various points in Indian history part of various empires based out of Magad. For instance, the Nanda Empire. The 5th century and the 4th century BC, the Nanda Empire was a massive empire, very strong, powerful empire, short-lived but very powerful. The Nanda Empire was in power in India when the Greek warlord Alexander tried to invade India, disastrous attempt to invade India. Why did his soldiers rebel against him? Because they knew the military strength of the Nanda Empire. So, when the Nanda Empire was in power in India, Nepal, the territory of Nepal, was part of the territory of the Nanda Empire. Then you had the Mauryan Empire, an even larger empire, massive empire. Nepal was part of the territory of Chandragupta Maurya during the Mauryan Empire era. And of course, the even larger territory of Ashok Maurya, Ashoka the Great, also incorporated Nepal in it, right? So Chandragupta and Ashok, Nepal was part of their empires. Then you had the Shunga Empire, Pushyamitra Shunga, 185 BC, right? Nepal was part of Pushyamitra Shunga's empire. Pushyamitra Shunga arrested the imperial decline of India at the hands of the later Mauryan kings, and he re-established political unity to a large extent and stability in India. So Nepal was part of the empire of Pushyamitra Shunga, very much so. And then when it comes to the Kushan Empire, are you even kidding me? The Kushan Empire It touched the banks of the Caspian Sea and the Aral Sea. It also incorporated parts of what is now called Xinjiang, the Tarim River Basin region, and of course large parts of northern India and western India. The capital of the Kushan Empire was, it had two capitals, Mathura and Purushpur, or Peshawar today. Patliputra was part of it, and Nepal was very much part of the Kushan Empire. Now, some very intelligent people will say the Kushans were not Indians. Please take a hike. The Kushans were more Indian than most Indians you think of. The Kushan Empire did more to promote India's national interest, civilizational interest, and to spread Indian culture worldwide than most Indian empires you know of. So the Kushans were more Indian than most other Indian empires, right? Then you had the Gupta Empire, right? When did the Gupta Empire come to power? In the 4th century AD until about the middle of the 5th century AD. The Gupta Empire, they had some magnificent, brilliant rulers. Chandragupta the first, Chandragupta the second, Kumar Gupta, Skanda Gupta, Samudra Gupta. So the Nepal region was very much part of the Gupta Empire. All right. Then you had the Karkota Empire based out of Srinagar, Kashmir, another massively expansionist but short-lived empire. Parts of Nepal were part of the Karkota Empire as well, maybe whole of it. Then you had the Pala Empire based out of the east of India. Well, parts of Nepal were part of the Pala Empire as well. The Pala Empire was a reasonably long-lived empire around the middle of the 8th century AD until the middle of the 12th century AD. So Nepal was part of the Pala Empire as well. So I mean, you can look all this up yourself. Don't ask me for sources. Do some homework. Those of you who are going to say, show me the evidence, look it up. I'm not going to spoon feed you. All right. So you will be able to find all the corroboration that you want of whatever I have said in various history textbooks. If you will only take the trouble to open a textbook for yourself. And please don't rely on Google searches. Please don't do that. Do some actual work. So Nepal was always part of various Indian kingdoms and empires, and it has always been part of India. The Nepalese people are no different from the Indian people. Same ethnicity, same culture, same ancestry, same everything, same language, same culture, same religion, and so on and so forth. It's only in the 18th century that Nepal emerged for the first time as an independent entity under Prithvi Narayan Shah, who conquered the Newar Valley, and he forged this little kingdom there. And it is an independent nation because of an accident of history. The British deemed it worthwhile to allow Nepal to remain nominally independent, nominally outside the British Raj, as a buffer state, because there was a significant amount of Chinese interference in Tibet at the time. So they wanted a buffer. And that's why Nepal remained nominally independent, but not truly independent. Nepal has always been part of the Indian economy. Nepal was always integrated with the economy of the larger Indian subcontinent, part of Jambudweep, right? So that's what it was. And you may think that Nepal was independent as a kingdom, but let me remind those of you who don't realize this, that the incident in Jallianwala Bagh, the massacre, just revisit that chapter of history and find out who were the soldiers who were firing bullets at unarmed civilians. Just find out. At least 50% of the soldiers who fired bullets at unarmed civilians, men, women, children, were Gorkhas. Now, I am not blaming the Nepalese people for what happened, but I'm just pointing out that Nepal, if you think it was independent, think again. Yeah, there is something called independence in name, and then there is something called independence in fact. So these two things, please understand, they are not the same. So anyway, that is about the Nepal. Nepal has always been part of India's civilization and culture, and in the future it will still remain that. Right. Okay, Bobby says, it is said that the Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the oldest surviving texts, which is dated to about 1800 BC. The Chins have a book from Confucius dated back to the 2nd century BC. The Rig Veda is older. To my understanding, the surviving text was written on perishable material. It was likely copied. It's dated to about 1500 BC or so. So how can we tell the actual age? By the language, by the material used, or by a special method of dating? So there are multiple ways of seeing, of trying to surmise what is the date of a certain text or a certain piece of literature. First of all, you look for the oldest hard evidence, written evidence. So I think in the case of the Epic of Gilgamesh, it would be written on clay tablets in cuneiform script. So clay is is a hardy material, especially baked clay. It can survive if you keep it in the right conditions for thousands of years. Yeah. There's so many old clay tablets that you find. The treaty between the Mitanni and the Hittites, which is the oldest evidence of Indian gods, Rig Vedic gods, Mitra, Varuna, Indra, and so on. That is cuneiform script on clay tablets, right? So one of the ways, the first evidence you look for is the hard evidence, hard archaeological evidence. So I'm not sure what is the oldest hard evidence of the Rig Veda. Is the text dated back to 1500 BC? Maybe it is. I'm not sure. Maybe it is. Let's say it is. So in the old days, uh, texts were written on birch bark in northern India, which is now Gandhar, Kashmir, right? Right. So Gandhar is no longer part of India as of today. Kashmir is obviously part of India. So in North India, where you had birch trees and all that, they would write texts on birch bark. They would write texts on various other perishable material, and uh, and we had lots of texts in universities and libraries which were all destroyed. So that's why we've kind of lost the actual hard evidence of how old all of this is. So maybe I'm not sure if this is the correct date, 1500 BC, but let's say it is. Now, it is believed, uh, the mainstream historians, especially colonial historians, have been claiming for the past 150 years or so that the Vedic age dates back to about 1500 BC. That is the chronology of the Aryan invasion myth. Now, how do we actually date the approximate time period of the Rig Veda? So it's not going to be possible to do it based on hard evidence, because the oldest text that we have, written inscription, will be dated to whatever it is, and maybe it's older than that. So one has to do a linguistic analysis to understand, first of all, what is the time period. So for instance, the oldest hard evidence, written evidence of Sanskrit that we have, is found in the Mitanni Hittite region, which is present day Anatolia. Let's put that on the screen. Let's go to the map. So this region here, northern Syria, Anatolia, Turkey, this was the region where 3,500 years ago you had two major kingdoms here. One was the Mitanni kingdom, the other was the Hittite kingdom. Now, the interesting thing about both these kingdoms is that one spoke the Hittite language, one spoke the Hurrian language, which were both local languages, Anatolian languages. But both of these kingdoms had an aristocratic royal class that spoke Vedic Sanskrit. So the royalty spoke Sanskrit, which means that they were locals ruled by an a Sanskrit speaking Indian origin royalty. That's what it was. And we know this for a fact because we found the clay tablets of their peace treaty, in which the gods Indra, Mitra, Varuna, etc. are invoked to witness the treaty and to bless the treaty, to make sure that it succeeds. And you also have a horse training manual by a horse master, the royal horse master of the Mitanni, whose name was Kikuli. So he wrote this horse training manual for training regular horses and making them into war horses, a detailed manual in the Hittite language, in the cuneiform script. But the problem he faced is that there were certain terms for which there was no equivalent word in the Hittite language, technical terms, scientific terms. So for those technical and scientific terms, he used Sanskrit words because he clearly was proficient in Sanskrit. So these are the oldest written evidences of Sanskrit that we have. Now, this has been known for a century or so, and linguists have done the linguistic analysis of the kind of Sanskrit that is found in all these ancient inscriptions, and it is found that the Sanskrit that is in evidence 3,500 years ago in this region is late Vedic Sanskrit. So it has plenty of words that are found in the Atharva Veda and the later Vedas, but those words are extremely rare or non-existent in the Rig Veda. So the Sanskrit that we have, the vocabulary is very clearly late Vedic Sanskrit. Now, these empires flourished, the Hittite Empire and the Mitanni Empire, they flourished around 1500 BC. And they would the Indians who migrated to this region would have done so at least 500 years before today. So before that time. So they would have reached this region around 2000 BC at the latest, maybe even before that. So that would tell us that around 2000 BC was the late Vedic period, or maybe before that. And the Rig Vedic period must have been maybe 1,000 years, maybe 2,000 years, or something like that before that. We don't know for sure. So that is one way of dating the approximate chronology of the Vedas, that the Rig Veda would definitely come before 2000 BC. The other evidence that we have is from the Rig Veda itself, the various mentions of the river Saraswati. It is mentioned as an actual river, not as a mythical figurative river, a literal, actual, physical, geographical river. That's how it's mentioned. It's mentioned as a massive river, as the mother of floods, as a loudly roaring river, and a glorious river, and so on and so forth. And now we know it existed. I mean, nobody can deny it anymore. It's there are plenty of research papers, even in Nature, the most prestigious scientific journal, in which it is now called the Saraswati. It is not even called the Ghaggar Hakra. So it's now clear this river existed. It was the most massive river in India at the time, and it dried out around 1500 BC. It was last in its prime around 6000 BC, and it started declining slowly because of the decline of the Indian monsoon. So it is clear that the Rig Veda would have been written closer to 6000 BC, when the river was last in its prime, and not closer to 1500 BC. So these are approximate ways in which we can date the Vedas, especially the Rig Veda, because the Rig Veda is essentially the starting point of the the Vedic age, and you could call it the starting point of Indian civilization. There are events that the Rig Veda mentions and the Puranas mention that would have happened even before the Rig Veda, most likely. But if we consider the Rig Veda to be the starting point of Indian civilization, then it would most likely have been written closer to 6000 BC than to 1500 BC. That's what we can surmise. So we have these various indirect ways of gauging the approximate time period of the Vedas and the Rig Veda, but it's still a work in progress. As you can see, we still don't have a very hard evidence of the exact time period for sure. So right now we have to make do with approximate chronological time periods. Okay, Rushikesh says, that was very cheeky of you to mention Dimona. It gave Israel the Samson option. I want to ask you if the Vanunu episode was deliberate plan by the Mossad to make enemies of Israel nervous, or was it plain stupidity on his part? So I had mentioned something about Israel a few episodes ago, and I took a detour on the map at Dimona. So let's do it again in case you're not aware of what this entire matter is. Let's go to the map. So what is Dimona? Where is Israel? Let's locate Israel. We know where India is. Let's go westwards. West of India, you have a temporary nation called Pakistan, then Iran, then Iraq, then Syria. And west of Syria and Jordan, you have the small Eastern Mediterranean nation of Israel. So what is Dimona? Let's go to the actual satellite imagery. Where is Dimona? Where is Dimona? Okay, maybe it's not loading very quickly. So Dimona is near Beersheba. Here it is, Dimona, in the desert. So let's take a closer look at Dimona, shall we? So this is the town of Dimona. Now there is something interesting nearby. Where is the nearby thing? Let's see. Maybe it's here. So what is this place? There are certain very characteristic things that you see here. In one of these places, if you do some digging, you will find the telltale signs. Okay, this is not the place. This is a fertilizer plant, is it? All right, here we are. The Negev Nuclear Research Center. It does research, nuclear research. And as you can see here, it is kind of obfuscated and not very clear, maybe on purpose. Maybe Google is cooperating with the Israeli government. But whatever, you can see that there are nuclear reactors, at least one nuclear reactor here. So this is and this is what gave Israel the Samson option, which means the nuclear option. And this most likely happened in the 1960s, 70s, that Israel developed nuclear weapons capabilities. Now, what is the Vanunu episode is the question. There was this a technician, Israeli technician who worked in the Negev nuclear research plant. His name is Mordechai Vanunu. Let's take a look at what this gentleman looks like. Mordechai Vanunu. All right, let us put that on the screen. So this guy used to work there. He was not a scientist; he was a technician of some kind. And what this guy did is that he leaked in Israel's nuclear secrets. He sold. He took photographs surreptitiously, which is clearly, I would say, a breach of security. It is a lapse on the part of the Israeli government and the whoever was in charge of security there. And then he sold these photographs and the story to, I think, News of the World in the UK, if I'm not mistaken. I may be wrong about that, but some publication in the UK. And then he was captured by the Israelis. He spent some years in jail, in prison. I think he spent time globe-trotting. He was in Australia for some time. He was in various parts of Europe, and then he was lured by the Israelis through the good old honey trap method. And he was captured. He was brought back to Israel. He spent a significant amount of time in prison. He converted to Christianity. He started calling himself David Crossman or something. Some Crossman thing was there, and so on. And now I think he lives in Israel. He's not allowed to leave the country. And yeah, so that's the story of Mordechai Vanunu. The Israelis consider him to be a traitor, and he may think of himself as something else, and so on. So that's how the world came to know about the fact that the Israelis had nuclear capabilities, and maybe they have a significantly non-trivial nuclear arsenal. Yeah. So the Israelis have neither confirmed nor denied the fact that the fact that they have nuclear weapons or not, but you can see that there is a nuclear power plant in this place, Dimona, right? So what is the Vanunu episode? Is it a deliberate plan by Mossad to make enemies of Israel nervous, or was it plain stupidity on his part? I'm not sure. Maybe we will never know. So one possibility, I mean, yeah, it's always good to let your enemies know that you have certain options. Yeah, it's always good to do that. So in that case, maybe it was deliberate, or maybe it was stupidity on his part, or maybe on the part of the Israeli government. So these are the various options, possibilities, scenarios. I don't know for sure, because hey, these are top secret matters. So maybe it was deliberate. Maybe it was Israel's way of letting its enemies know that this is what we can do to you, or maybe it was just plain stupidity. But I think it has served Israel well that its enemies know that it has nukes. So maybe it was deliberate, we don't know. Maybe they used somebody who was not very bright and used him in this manner, manipulated him into revealing secrets which they wanted to be revealed. That is a possibility, but we don't know for sure. We don't know. But that, in short, is the story. Okay, Abhiram says, how did the booming economy of Japan and its young population in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s turn into stagnation and older population? Right. So we know that Japan was once a major, very rapidly growing economy, booming economy. I think in the 1980s, I believe, if I am not mistaken, Japan had become the world's second largest economy, most likely, by the time the 1980s rolled into the picture. Japan underwent this massive rejuvenation of the nation after the disaster of the Second World War, when it was nuked twice. The whole nation was destroyed. They rebounded rapidly. They went to work. They modernized very fast. Yes, I think in the 1960s, 70s, the economy was growing at 10% plus per year, 12% plus per year, very rapid growth. Yeah. So we know that Japan is controlled by the US. The Americans have more than 130 permanent military bases on Japanese soil. The Constitution of Japan has been written by the US in 1945. Not a single word has been changed. So the entire nation is essentially a vassal state, a puppet state of the US. Various Japanese politicians have revealed that no major decision can be done by the Japanese government without the express approval of the US military and the US government, and so on. So this nation is fully controlled by the US. It is not a free nation. It may have elections, it may have democracy, and the individuals may be free, but overall the nation is completely controlled by the US. Understand that. Now, so what happened? Japan was booming, the economy was booming, and suddenly something went wrong. So what happened is this: in the late 1970s, early 1980s, the Japanese bank, the Bank of Japan, the government had kept interest rates very low. What does that do? When interest rates are low, the people and the businesses can borrow money. It's good for borrowing. Let's say you want to expand your business. Let's say you want to do more R&D, research and development work. You will need money for that. You need capital for that. If you can borrow money at low interest rates, it's good. Let's say I want to borrow money and the bank is giving me a 10% interest rate, and I want to borrow, let's say, 100 rupees for 5 years. So after 5 years, I'm going to have to give them 150 rupees back because it's 10% interest per year. This is a very rough hypothetical example. But what if I'm getting the same money at 2% interest rate? Then instead of 150, I have to give them 110 after 5 years. So if the interest rates are low, it boosts the economy. It means there is more borrowing, there is more emphasis on research and development, and the economy grows. So during this time, when the interest rate was lowered, the Japanese economy grew rapidly. All the various Japanese technological firms like Sony and whatnot, they did very well. There was a lot of emphasis on research and development. That's why the Japanese uh, nation became the most technologically advanced nation in the world, right? Now, in 1985, there was something called the Plaza Accords. This was between the US, France, Germany, UK, and Japan. 5 nations. One is the US, the other 4 are France, UK, Germany, and Japan. France is a reasonably independent nation, but Germany, the UK, and Japan are proper vassal states of the US. So these 5 nations decided to manipulate international exchange rates. It was all done at the behest of the Americans. So what the outcome was of this is that the US dollar depreciated in value, and the Japanese yen, the Japanese currency, the yen, appreciated in value. This was manipulation of international currency exchange rates. So when your currency becomes more valuable, more expensive, your exports decrease, your imports increase, because your population, which has money, suddenly the money has more value, so you can buy more. So imports increase, but your exports decrease. So that kind of flattens the economy. So because of the Plaza Accords, Japanese exports suddenly slowed down and imports started increasing. Then the exchange rates were further decreased. Yeah. So because of that, the real estate market in Japan started booming, and real estate property became very expensive, and people started buying property. There was this big real estate bubble. And then for whatever reason, the Bank of Japan increased the interest rates. What this did was, first of all, there was a stagnation of the economy. The people of Japan who had bought all this property, expensive property, suddenly found themselves saddled with property that is now lower in value, and now in the loans that they had taken, they had to pay more interest on them now, on the loans. Because of this, the entire consumer behavior changed in Japan, and the Japanese people stopped consuming. They stopped spending money, and the consumption went down. So there was deflation, there was stagnation of the economy, and over time this went on and on. And even today, the Japanese population, the Japanese economy has not recovered from there. The Japanese yen is now on very shaky ground. So this is not the entire story. I'm just giving you the very rough highlights. It is the actions of the Japanese government and the Bank of Japan that caused this entire thing to happen. They first kept the interest rates very low. Yeah, and then there were the Plaza Accords orchestrated by the Americans, which manipulated the global exchange rates. It made the Japanese currency more valuable. It made it appreciate. Then there was the real estate bubble engineered by the Japanese bank, the Bank of Japan, and then they suddenly increased the interest rates, which totally destroyed the economy. So they called the 1990s the lost decade. The decade in which there was no growth in Japan. There was stagnation, almost no growth, 1% or 2% growth, less than 2% most likely. Yeah, maybe 1.2% growth. And Yeah, so the economy shrunk, consumer behavior changed completely. The entire society became closed down, pessimistic. People stopped having children. Everything became more expensive, and you can see the results of that today. Japan has this rapidly aging population. The birth rates are way down. Yeah, way below for replacement, and the economy is not doing well. It's still stagnating. So it all originates in the actions of the Japanese government and the Bank of Japan, and all orchestrated by the Americans in the late 1970s, mid 1980s, late 1980s. That's where it all happened. And that's how the entire nation went from a vibrant, booming economy into an economy that is beset with deflation and stagnation. And that's where it is today. That's what happened. Okay, Shazam says, please tell us something about Damascus steel. Damascus steel is a misnomer. It's a misnomer. The actual steel was Indian steel. So I don't know what its actual name was. It is the method of manufacturing this, of smelting this steel, is the crucible method. It's called crucible steel. At various points in time, it has been called ceramic steel or whatever. Um, Let me show you what this particular kind of steel looks like, right? Okay, let's put that on the screen. So this is a very specific method of smelting steel, in which you introduce impurities, carbon and all that various things into the steel to give it a certain set of characteristics. It's a very strong steel. If you do a microscopic study of the kind of steel that you have here, you will find carbon nanotubes that are introduced into it. And this process, it is known to have existed in India at least since 500 BC. 500 BC. India is the world's first completely industrialized civilization. And this is a good example of that. So, the oldest examples of this steel manufacturing process, the crucible steel manufacturing process, were discovered in southern India, Tamil Nadu, and even Sri Lanka around 500 BC. And this steel was exported to other parts of the world, to the Middle East, maybe to Mesopotamia, maybe to Egypt. The Greek warlord Alexander is supposed to have been given a gift of a certain amount of this steel because it was the best steel in the world. The Romans used to import this steel from India because they could not manufacture this kind of steel. And it was merchants in Damascus who used to import the steel from India. And when the Europeans went there, they called it Damascus steel. It is not Damascus steel. The merchants in Damascus used to import the steel from India, and then they would shape it into swords and daggers and whatever else, right? So that's why it's called Damascus steel, but it's actually Indian origin steel. So it's got this incredibly beautiful geometric pattern thing. So this is what Damascus steel looks like. And nowadays the manufacturing method is reasonably well known, right? So it is not something that originated in Syria. It's where the Europeans first found it. The Europeans have this habit of giving ridiculous names to things. So when they first came into the Eastern Asia region, they found that there were lots of Chinese merchant vessels in a certain part of the world. They called it the South China Sea. It's never been Chinese. It was always the Champa Sea, the Champa Samudra, but they called it the South China Sea. When the British took over parts of Eastern India, Bengal, they called that part of the Indian Ocean the Bay of Bengal. It's not the Bay of Bengal, it is the Kalinga Mahasagar. The British named the western region, the western part of the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea. It's not the Arabian Sea, it is the Sea of Saurashtra, and so on and so forth. They have this horrible tendency of giving inappropriate and incorrect names to various things. Whatever they see, they give their own, well, names. So Damascus steel is not Damascus steel. It is Indian steel. As far as we know, the oldest evidence of this, the manufacturing process, is known to have existed in southern India, Tamil Nadu, and Sri Lanka, at least around 500 BC. Maybe it must have been much older than that. We still don't know when it actually originated. So that's how old this manufacturing process was, and it originates in India, not in Syria or Damascus. All right. Descendant of Rigvedic clans says, who is Ötzi, the Iceman? What was his connection with the North Indian population? What is transitive Brahmi script? Okay. Three questions. Let's take one. Okay, who was this guy, Ötzi, the Iceman? Let's put him on the screen, shall we? Ötzi, the Iceman. Okay, this is. I'm gonna show you the image of a dead person. In case you don't like to see it, switch off. All right. So this is a person who died about 5,200 years ago, and he died in the European Alps, in the region between Italy and Austria, the Alps in that region, the mountains, high up in the mountains. And he died and he froze to death. I mean, he didn't freeze to death. He died and then his body froze. And it was rediscovered in 1991 by, I think, hitchhikers or mountaineers. And they thought they had come across a murder scene, which actually was a murder scene, but it was 5,200 years old. So let me show you what this gentleman looked like. Yes, it's a dead body. It's a mummified person. I will not enlarge the images in case it is distressing for some people, but this is what it looks like. This is a reconstruction of the gentleman's face, a reasonably handsome person. Yes, maybe he needs a shave, but yeah, that's what it is believed he looked like. This is a reconstruction of his appearance and his visage. Ötzi the Iceman. Now, they make him look very European. It is known that he had brown eyes and dark brown or black hair, and his skin was not exactly white, it was light brown. He had a proper Mediterranean appearance, and genetically he is close to the people of the Mediterranean region. If you look at the Mediterranean region, uh, southern Italy, Greece, Lebanon, etc., the skin color, the skin tones you find in these regions, that's the kind of skin tone that he had. So it's not proper what you would call the white race, it's like light brown race. Yeah. So that's what this gentleman looked like. So what is this guy's story? So they found the body in 1991, if I'm not mistaken, frozen. Yeah, this is what it looked like. That's what he looked like when he was found. As you can see, that's how they found him. He was frozen, stuck in the ice. Then the body was extracted by various, I don't know, researchers, archaeologists, whoever it was. It is now preserved someplace. I don't know where it is preserved. It is preserved at minus 23 degrees or something, and they take good care to ensure that the body doesn't degrade, right? And then they were able to do CT scans and various other tests of this gentleman and to figure out how he died. So they found out that he had some nice weapons. He had a flint or stone knife and a copper axe, a very good quality copper axe. He wore clothes that were good for at least 2-3 layers of clothing, good boots. He had a fur cap that was made up of the fur of a bear, I think. Yeah. They were able to determine what kind of food he had eaten. His last meal, there was meat, I believe, of some kind. And then they found that he had a wound on his hand which came from grasping a blade which somebody was trying to push at him. So it was a self-defense wound. He tried to grasp a blade and it cut his palm to some extent, and the wound was healing, which means that he survived that attack or that fight which he got into. And they also determined the cause of his death. The cause of his death was an arrow in his back. So yes, it was a murder. He was shot to death. He also had, I think, some kind of traumatic head injury, maybe hemorrhaging of the brain or something, which would indicate that maybe he hit his head when he fell down, or maybe he was hit on the head later on, something like that. So it was not a very peaceful death. It was a violent death. He carried arrows, a bunch of arrows, a bundle of arrows, and so on. So that's what we know about him. This entire thing, his death happened about 5,200 or so years before today, roughly. And it's one of the best preserved ancient naturally mummified bodies that exists today. And there's still plenty of research that's being done on his body. So genetically, he's believed to be closely related to the people of the Mediterranean region, the South Mediterranean or so, that sort of region. I am not sure what his connection is with the North Indian population and so on. So not sure about that. So that's what I can tell you. Okay, Mazhar says, is it true that the Indian subcontinent was first called Sindh, later it became Hind because the Persians could not pronounce Sa? Let's go to the map to understand what really happened. Where is the map? Here's the map. One second. Let me zoom out of Israel. Okay, maps. Come on. Where's the map? Here it is. I'm not sure why it's showing me the night side. Okay, here where we are. Let's put the actual map on. Okay. So the question is it true that the Indian subcontinent was first called Sindh? No. The Indian subcontinent was called Jambudweep or Aryavart. That's what the Indians called it. Now, where does this term Sindh come from? It comes from the river Sindhu, which is now called Indus in the English language, the Sindhu River. So it's the river that flows through ancient Meenanagar, present day Karachi, if I am not mistaken, somewhere here. So the river, its original name was Sindhu. Now you are right that our Persian cousins had a different way of pronouncing the language. The old Persian language was nothing but a slightly distorted Apabhransha version of Sanskrit. The pronunciations were different. So instead of sa, they would say ha, right? So instead of Sindh, they would say Hind. And the Greeks and other foreigners who came to India, they came through Persia. And when they would have conversed with the Persian friends of ours, the Persians would have said, yes, Hind, over there, Hind. Yeah, eastwards. So that's how all the foreigners started calling India Hind. That's how it happened. It happened because the Persians called this region the region of the Sindhu River, but they called it the Hindu region or the Hind region. And that's how the term India came into the picture, which was a further corruption of Hind into India or whatever. So that is the story in brief. How India came to be known as Hind, because our Persian cousins could not pronounce Sa. Even in Western India, there are certain places in Gujarat, Rajasthan, where even today instead of Sa, they say Ha. So there is some of that in India as well. Okay, Anurag says, in the movie 300, it was shown that Xerxes had gargantuan elephants and rhinos in his army. My question is if the depiction was true, then where did he manage to get those animals from, as they're not found in Iran? So who was this gentleman called Xerxes? First of all, the movie is a fictional depiction of something that actually happened. It is a fictional depiction of the Battle of Thermopylae, which happened in Greece. So Xerxes was one of the great Persian emperors of the Hakshamanish dynasty, the Achaemenid dynasty. His name was not Xerxes, his name was Kshayarsha. That's his name. He was the son of Darius the Great. Xerxes lived in the fifth century BC. He ruled Iran, Persia, in the 5th century BC. Let me put that on the screen so that you understand what the region is. So this is the region of Iran. He had a big empire, and he expanded westwards. He conquered Anatolia, and he fought the Greeks. Anatolia, which is present-day Turkey, was historically Greek territory. The Greeks lived there. The ancient city of Troy is found in Anatolia, in western Anatolia. So Anatolia, present-day Turkey, was Greek territory. Mr. Xerxes, Emperor Kshayarsha, conquered Anatolia, and he ventured into Greece, and he fought this great battle, the Battle of Thermopylae, which was a victory for the Persians, a defeat for the Greeks. He was able to capture Athens, the capital of Greece, and he ordered this city to be destroyed. And we have discovered archaeological evidence of the Persian destruction of Athens. And then the city was rebuilt, obviously. We know that. So the question is, in the movie, this guy, Emperor Kshayarsha, is depicted as having had gargantuan elephants and rhinos in his army. Where did he get them from? So first of all, the rhinoceros is not an elephant you can tame. That is a massively dangerous and incredibly powerful animal. You cannot tame it, and you certainly cannot use it for warfare. So that was what you call a creative liberty in the movie. The movie makers took some creative liberties, and they portrayed this guy as having rhinoceroses in his army. He would not ever have had rhinos. It's possible that he may have had elephants. Now obviously we know that elephants don't live, elephants are not found in Iran, so obviously he would have acquired them from India. See, the Persians were descendants of Indians, lots of close cultural, ethnic ties with India. India and Persia were neighboring civilizations, and I am sure India and Persia had excellent relations. The Persians, as far as we know, never ever tried to invade India during the entire time period of the Achaemenid dynasty, the Achaemenid dynasty. So it's possible that India and Persia had excellent trade relations, cultural relations, diplomatic relations, marriage relations, and whatnot. And therefore, the Persian emperor may have acquired elephants from India, from whoever was his counterpart as king or queen or whatever in India at the time. So it's possible that the Persians may have had war elephants. If they did have them, they would have acquired them from India. As far as rhinos are concerned, not possible. Rhinos are too violent, too dangerous, and too unpredictable to be tamed, and you cannot use them for warfare. As far as I know, to the best of my knowledge. All right. So that's the answer to this question. All right. Next question. Pseudopodia says the Thai script is very much similar to the other South Indian scripts. However, it includes Sanskrit words. Can you explain this? Please understand the difference between a script and a language. A language can include Sanskrit words. A script is simply a writing system. You can write anything in any specific script. So, for instance, there is the Latin script which emerged out of Italy. It was used to write Latin, the Latin language. But after the Romans conquered most of Europe, that script was imposed on all the local cultures. And today you write the English language in the Latin script. So the script is just a vehicle to carry any language. Yep. So the Thai script. Okay, let's see what the Thai script looks like, shall we? Let's take a look at that. Let me put that on the screen. Omniglot. Omniglot Thai. Put that on the screen. Let's see what the Thai script or alphabet looks like. Come on, here we are. The Thai language. This is what the script looks like. As you can see, it looks kind of similar to various southern Indian scripts, even the script of the Odia language. Yes. This is what it looks like. E, E, U, A, I, O, all those vowels and consonants and all that. So as you can see, it's quite similar to various southern Indian scripts. What about the Burmese language? Let's take a look at the Burmese language and the Burmese script. Ka, ka, ga, ga, na, cha, cha, da, da, na, and so on and so forth. It looks again suspiciously related to various southern Indian scripts. Let's take a look at the Khmer script of Cambodia. What does the Khmer script look like? Here we are. Ka, ka, cha, cha, da, tha. Once again, as you can see, it's quite similar to Thai, Burmese, and various ancient or southern Indian scripts. Let's take a look at one more script from Laos, the Lao script, which is spoken in Laos, in Cambodia, and Vietnam. The language, and this is the script. Ka, ka, ga, all that, the same thing. Once again, very similar. Ka, ka, ki, ku, ke, all that stuff, which we are very familiar with if we have ever learned any Indian language. All of these scripts are descended from the ancient Pallava script, which was written in South India. It was used to write Sanskrit, various varieties of Prakrit, including Pali, and later it was exported to various parts of southeastern India, Southeast Asia. This is the Pallava script, right? So there you are. That's what it is. So, and the Pallava script itself is a descendant of Brahmi. So this shows you the kind of influence, the enormous influence India has had on Southeast Asia, on Thailand, on Cambodia, on Laos, on Vietnam, on Indonesia, and all the way up to the Philippines. And it goes way beyond that. So, yeah, so this is the Thai language, and that's why it is the way it is. And the Thai script can even be used for writing Sanskrit, right? So it's because of the ancient Indian history. It was first the Kalinga Empire and Kingdom that spread Indian culture all the way across Southeast Asia, and then it was the Imperial Cholas who went a step further and spread more Indian culture and possibly the Pallava script in this region, right? So that is the history that explains all of this. Okay, let's take a couple more questions. Okay, this is a question I've never had before. Harsh says, please tell something about Gautami Putra Satkarni, one of the greatest rulers of India, I believe, and how Satvahanas pose challenges to the belief that India has always been a patriarchal society. Okay, the Satvahanas. I've never really had a question on Satvahanas. So, the Satvahana dynasty was also known as the Andhra dynasty. They ruled in between the 3rd century BC and the 1st or 2nd centuries BC, yeah, in southern and central India. It at its greatest extent, it incorporated parts of Saurashtra, Gujarat, Western Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Karnataka, etc. Big. If you look at the size of the greatest extent of the Satvahana Empire, it was roughly the size of Germany and Spain put together. Big. Its capital city was Pratishthan, modern day Paithan in Maharashtra. And they were great patrons of arts and culture and Hinduism and Buddhism and whatnot. Literature, they built stupas and lots of things. And what does Satvahan mean? The word Satvahan is the Prakrit form of the Sanskrit term Saptavahana. And what is Saptavahana? The chariot of the sun, which is driven by 7 horses. So indirectly, they are implying that they belong to the Surya Vansh, the solar dynasty, right? So the greatest king, obviously, was Gautami Putra Satkarni. He was the son of Queen Gautami Balashri. He lived in the 1st or 2nd century AD, and he is said to have defeated lots of people: the Shakas or the Scythians, the Yavanas, the Pahlavas, and various other people. And his extraordinary conquests and achievements are described in enormously great detail, very great detail, in the Nashik inscription of his mother. Now, one of his greatest rivals was the great was the Western satraps empire, the great Mahakshatrapas of Western India, who ruled the region of Gujarat, Rajasthan, Maharashtra, parts of Maharashtra, parts of Sindh, and so on and so forth. So it is believed possibly that Gautami Putra Satkarni may have defeated the great Mahakshatrapa Nahapana. And this belief comes from the known fact that many of Nahapana's coins are superimposed with Gautami Putra Satkarni's inscriptions. But that doesn't conclusively prove that this actually happened. Maybe it is possible or even likely that Gautami Putra Satkarni may have lived 1 or 2 generations after Nahapana. Overall, if you see, Nahapana was one of the greatest of rulers of Western India, or possibly all of India, possibly even greater than Gautami Putra Satkarni. But Gautami Putra Satkarni himself was one of the great rulers of India. He had two sons, Vashishthi Putra Pulavami and Vashishthi Putra Satkarni. And then after him, the empire slowly declines. His son married the daughter of the Mahakshatrapa Rudradaman I, and he still entered into conflicts with Rudradaman. He was twice defeated by his father-in-law. Each time he lost territory, but he was spared because of the family relationship, and so on. And eventually, the empire declined and disintegrated over time. The last ruler of the empire was Yajna Shri Shatakarni, who lived most likely in the 2nd century AD. But overall, the greatest ruler of the Satvahanas was Gautami Putra Satkarni, who had significant major achievements and who was a great patron of arts and culture and religion and literature, who built stupas and things, who did public works. So one of the great rulers for sure. So That's an interesting chapter of Indian history that is typically not really uh, well known. And it's something that I speak about in my course. All right, let's talk about something else. Okay, long question. Jag Roshan Singh says, I wonder how is a country able to recognize its adversary and counterattack if the nuclear tipped ballistic missile gets fired from the ocean, from the sea, using a submarine? Example, let's say India fires a nuke into China from a nuclear submarine in the Pacific Ocean. How is China going to figure out who did this? Because the submarine appears from nowhere, and after firing the missile, it disappears into nowhere. Excellent question. Excellent question. So that is the point of having submarines, especially nuclear submarines with long endurance. They can stay like 6 months submerged without ever coming up for air. So they can stay deep under the ocean for months at a time, going around the oceans, and then they can fire a missile from anywhere they want and then quietly disappear. So how will the nation that receives the missile know where it came from and who is responsible for the attack? That is the question. That is a very good question. So it's like this. There is a whole version of warfare happening right now, this very moment, that we are not aware of. Submarine warfare. It is a cat and mouse game that's happening as we speak right now. There are fleets of submarines in the Pacific Ocean, in the Atlantic Ocean, in the Antarctic Ocean, in the Northern Ocean, Arctic Ocean, in the Indian Ocean, in the Bay of Bengal, in the Sea of Saurashtra, in the Persian Gulf. There are fleets of submarines playing a cat and mouse game right now. American submarines, Russian submarines, Chinese submarines, Indian submarines, maybe one or two Pakistani submarines. They are all shadowing each other. They're all trying to figure out who's going where. And there are other military assets involved in this. Ships also monitor the movements of submarines. Aircraft are also equipped with technology that can detect magnetic anomalies deep under the ocean, which is the signature of a submarine, right? And so on. So it is the job, it is the professional duty of every navy to know exactly where the various submarines of its enemies are at any given point in time. And there are entire branches of the navy dedicated to doing this in a minute by minute basis, right? So you have satellites. Firstly, you have naval satellites that keep a close eye on all the naval ports and assets of your enemy nation. Let's say India wants to know what the Chinese are doing with their submarines. We know more or less where the Chinese submarine bases are. So we keep an eye on these Chinese submarine bases through our satellites, which can do a day and night surveillance. Of course, some of the submarine bases are underground and underwater and all that, so it's difficult. But that is the starting point. Then once you know that a certain submarine is out, so you need to know where the submarine bases are. You need to know exactly how many submarines your enemy has. What are the classes? What are the ranges? What is the endurance that each submarine has? You need to know this. It's your job to know this. If you don't know it, you're not doing your job. You're failing. Then you need to find ways of tracking the exact location of your enemy submarines or on a minute by minute basis. So for that, you have your own submarines that will shadow the enemy submarine. You have your own naval vessels, ships, merchant vessels disguised, naval ships disguised as merchant vessels, and so many other things. Then you have various choke points like the Malacca choke point, the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Bab al Mandeb, the various 10-degree channel, other channels in the Andaman Islands through which these submarines have to pass. So you can keep an eye over there. So it's a cat and mouse game that's happening every single moment as we speak. There are fleets of submarines of various nations that are shadowing each other and keeping an eye on what the other is doing. There are Chinese submarines that are being shadowed by Indian assets. There are American submarines that are being shadowed by Russian assets. And it is their job to know exactly what is happening, so that when one of them fires a missile, they will know immediately. And if they don't know, they have failed utterly in their duty. So that's how it is. Okay. So that's how, so it is not a foolproof thing. Sometimes you may make a mistake and you will not know where it comes from. But If you are a major power, or if you're aspiring to be a superpower, it is your business to be on top of this game, the submarine warfare game. And you should know exactly what is happening at any given point in time vis-a-vis the submarine assets of your enemies. And then you will know who did what. That's the answer. Dungar Singh Chauhan says, ebooks and PDFs have replaced paper books to a great extent. What's your take on this? Is it something that needs to happen, or is it just an increase in the already high screen time of people? Well, technology is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it is making access to books easier. You can now read books on your phone, yeah, and yeah, ebooks on your phone, PDFs on your phone. So if you have a phone, you can read stuff anytime you want. So it makes it easier to access books instead of going to a library and borrowing a book or purchasing a book which is expensive. You can actually get a lot of the stuff online, especially material that is now copyright free, or whose copyright has expired or whatever, right? And other things as well. So on one hand, it's great. On the other hand, it's not good, because when you have this screen time, when you keep staring at screens, there is this blue light that goes into your eyes, and this blue light has the tendency of keeping you awake. So it delays the onset of the melatonin hormone, which is this signal that you need to start sleeping. So every human being, every person has a circadian cycle, a sleep wake cycle, and it is something that is naturally wired in your brain. And this excessive amount of blue light that you get from various screens, phones, laptops, tablets, whatever, it messes up the circadian cycle, and that's what causes various sleep disorders and whatnot. So in the old days, before sleeping, people would spend half an hour, 1 hour reading a book. That's good. It slowly puts your brain to sleep if it's a boring book or not. Yeah. But if you do the same thing with the screen, it's going to prevent you from sleeping. It's going to make you sleep less. So yeah, it's bad. So I personally, as you can see, I prefer physical books. I do use PDFs from time to time whenever required, but I prefer to read books in the physical form, especially before sleeping. So it's not something that needs to happen. In some ways, it's not good, because it's causing all these sleep issues and all that. But it's just a sign of the times. We're in the 21st century, and we are facing these issues. I think physical books are still better from my own perspective. But well, things change, times change, and people move on. So that's where we are. Lage Raho online says, hello Abhijit Bhai. Our ancient Vedic culture observed miraculous benefits of fast and brahmacharya. You have also done it many times. What's your experience? So my experience is with fasting. I don't know the other thing. All right. Yeah, fasting is good. I have done multiple water fasts, extended water fasts. I've even documented that on my other YouTube channel. Yeah. The first time I did an extended fast was a 21-day water fast. No food, only water for 21 days. It was fine. Yeah, there was weakness and all that. Yeah, and there were these mental cravings for food, but overall it was fine. I lost obviously a lot of weight. So before you start a fast like that, you have to ensure that you put on some extra weight before you want to start a fast. So that way your body will be able to burn out all the excess weight that you've put on, and it will not cause any health issues. So the first fast I did was a 21-day water fast. The second fast I did was a 23-day water fast. And I think in December or something last year, I did a third fast, which was supposed to be a 21-day fast, but I stopped at 14 days. So I have done that. I think that the human body is very strong. You can withstand any kind of thing. And I always ensure that I put on some weight before I do an extended fast. So that way I'm safe and there is no health issue. And I always monitor my vital signs, blood pressure and heart rate, etc., at the same time every day, to make sure that everything is going fine and so on. My experience has been great. You lose weight, you lose strength, you lose muscle mass, which is not nice, but it's okay. It's one of the things that happens. It's inevitable when you go without food for an extended period of time. It gives you incredible mental clarity and focus, and overall it's a very positive experience. Yes, it's slow motion torture, because your mind craves food the body is doing fine, but the mind craves food and all. So yeah, that's been my experience. Maybe I will do it again in the future. Maybe once a year I can do an extended fast, 14 days, 21 days, whatever, depending on how I feel. It's not necessary, but I think overall fasting is beneficial. People who fast periodically on a regular basis, I think they live longer. Fasting, if you fast more than 3 or 4 days, go without food for more than 3 or 4 days, then it triggers a process called autophagy in the body, in which the body starts destroying all the damaged cells, dead cells, senescent cells, diseased cells, precancerous cells. It destroys them all and recycles the uh, cellular materials. So that's good for the body. If somebody has precancerous cells and they fast for, let's say, 5 days or 7 days, it may end up destroying all those precancerous cells, and so on and so forth. So it has very good benefits. Yeah, it makes your skin look good. It overall, you know, if you fast for more than 4 days, I believe you rebuild your immune system from scratch, which is again a good thing. So overall, I mean, it's always been part of Indian culture for thousands of years. Fasting. Typically, people would fast on certain days of the week, and nowadays the West is copying it. They call it intermittent fasting and whatnot. Yeah, so it's all being repackaged in different ways by the West. That's what happens. So overall, I have a significant amount of experience with fasting, water fasting, going without food for extended periods of time, 0 calories for 21 days, 23 days, 14 days, and it's worked well for me. I've overall felt very positive. There are obviously some side effects. You're going to lose weight, significant amounts of weight in a short period of time. You're going to lose strength, and there are certain symptoms that you experience that you may not enjoy overall, but overall it's a very positive thing. So that's been my experience vis-a-vis extended fasting. I'm not sure about brahmacharya. That's not something that I am experienced in. Okay, let's take some questions from the live chat, shall we? Let's take some live chat questions. If there are any, I will take 2 or 3 questions before I'm done. Okay, this is by Sanathani. I prefer physical books too. Staring at a screen strains the eyes. No wonder most of the kids nowadays wear thick glasses. I agree. Kids are made to study all the time, and typically they are on a screen, on a laptop or a tablet or something, and close to your eyes. And yeah, actually, even I am nearsighted. When I go out, I wear glasses. Uh, that's because I read too many books as a kid, and maybe I kept them too close to my face. So you get that even if you read books all the time, if you don't read them in the proper way, which I must have done. But yeah, yes, I do prefer physical books. Okay, any other questions? Let us see. Do we have any other interesting questions? That what is lucid dreaming? What is lucid dreaming? I believe it is dreaming in which you participate consciously. So you're not entirely asleep. You're kind of aware that of the fact that you're dreaming, of what you're experiencing is not the real world. It's a dream, and then you can kind of possibly guide it in a certain direction. That sort of thing. So it's a state in which you are asleep, you are dreaming, but you are also aware of the fact that you are dreaming, and you can take certain decisions and make the dream go in a certain direction. Uh, that's what they call lucid dreaming. I believe we've had this for thousands of years. It's called yoga nidra or something. Uh, yeah, so that's not something I've ever experienced or tried to experience, but it's something interesting. Something interesting, and yeah, should try it if you can. It's something you have to learn. All right, what do we have? How to become a funny person? I think the best way to become a funny person is to have a sense of humor. I know people who have no sense of humor. That is, well, that's not funny. So you want to be funny, acquire a sense of humor, develop a sense of humor, look for the funny things in life. Yeah. And that's how you become funny, I suppose. I guess. All right, let's take maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Is there any other question? Not sure. I can see all kinds of questions, but Seven says best way to detox your body. You mean extended fasting, water fasting? Yes, certainly. It's a very good way to detox your body. Who were the Parthians? They were an Indo-Iranian people, the descendants most likely of the Rig Vedic Prithu clan, who who were on the losing side of the Battle of the Ten Kings. There was a confederation that fought this battle against King Sudas, and they all lost. And one of the members of this confederation was the Prithu clan, and most likely they are the ancestors of the Parthian peoples, who are an Indo-Iranian people who lived in the western regions of India. Perhaps, yeah, the Parthians. Yes. Okay, I guess we are done for today. We have again crossed 2 hours, which is always a good thing. Yeah. So thank you very much for all the questions, and let's keep on doing this. Please come up with new questions, interesting questions. You always have interesting questions, which I appreciate very much. So thank you very much. We are done for this week, and I will see you in the next episode very soon. Until then, take care and keep going in whatever you're doing. All the best.